Welcome back. You're watching the final edition of Business Morning for the week on Channels Television. I've been having a conversation with Adetilewa Adebajo, who's an investment banker. He's got 27 years experience actually in investment banking and finance in the corporate and academic sector. He's a credit and financial analyst. He's got 15 years in policy and financial advisory, project finance and consulting. He's an experienced African investment banking entrepreneur and chairman, Stationary Stores Football Club. I forgot to mention that one.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but so is your bar data. It's an impressive one at that. Thank you so much for sticking around, Mr. Adebajo. Let's go back. Just before we went on that break, we talked about the heavy debt financing that the budget's actually carrying. And it makes me wonder what the fate of the 2015 budget is going to be under this incoming administration. Do you think, or do you foresee a total overhaul of the budget, as it were?
Well, a total overhaul, I think, would be quite drastic and impractical in the sense that the government has to, first of all, get a handle on what's going on, because government, of course, is a continuity. And you have to be able to put in a plan, probably against next year's budget. So a lot of the changes you might want to make might come in probably fully against the budget. You'll probably start from maybe a zero base.
Yeah, but then, sorry to cut you there, but then if you're coming in with 6 to 7 billion, naira kind of debt, or $1 billion kind of debt, so how does that play out?
Well, the debt, fortunately, the debt profile is really not a big deal for now. That's really not the issue, because at 10 to 12%. Of GDP. Countries like Greece have it at 120% of GDP. So the debt profile really is not the key thing that you need to worry on. What the government first of all needs to look at is the percentage of their income that they're using to service that debt. And a predominant amount of this debt, about 47 billion of that, is in local domestic debt, which is at about 18%. It's quite expensive debt. So government needs to find a way to refinance that debt, probably through the Eurobond market, probably convert some of that to dollar debts, and probably pay lower rates of interest on that if possible. So the debt management office is going to be very busy, and they need to be able to put in strategies to be able to find an optimal structure for debt, because clearly there's going to be a need for more debt to be raised. And we do have that capacity to raise debt. But the key challenge is that, what do you now use that debt for? Do you use it to plug the gap, or you use it to fund investments? So clearly you need to, if you're raising debt, you need to use that debt to fund investments. Nigeria is still a very credible country. We have very strong credit ratings.
Which means we should go and borrow more.
Yeah, we will need to go borrow more. But there needs to be a plan as to what that borrowing would be used for. So the first 3 to 4 months, I think what the government will try to do is to tweak this budget to see how they can deliver, because we still have security challenges. A significant portion of this budget is education, is taking priority. Then the police and the army also now. So security is a very huge part of this budget. And if the sort of momentum now we've built a very strong momentum in flushing out the insurgents. And I think that it's important that that is sustained right away. So I don't think you're going to see those defense cuts right away. But clearly you're going to see the tweaking of that budget. But you need to also understand what you're inheriting. And I think they'll want to undertake an audit, both with the Accountant General, the Debt Management Office, to understand the dynamics of the debt profile. So it's important that the Debt Management Office is going to be very busy to be able to highlight this. And you need to be able to work out a clear plan to be able to now put in your programs, because you need to pay the judiciary, you need to pay the new members of the National Assembly. Their budget is $1 billion US. They're not going to tell you to cut their budgets in a hurry. So there are many things that you need to do to keep the government going before anything happens.
But then do you see the Buhari administration, making some cuts in expenditure in some areas, particularly since he's inheriting a huge debt, a debt which you said is not really supposed to give us any cause for worry, so our hearts shouldn't start palpitating at the moment, but we're getting there. But do you see that happening when he does come in?
Yes, I think, and from what Governor Fayemi said at the Lagos Business School, what is clear is that they will implement the Steve Oronsoye report. And in implementing the Steve Oronsoye report, what you're doing is consolidating. So that 42% that goes towards salaries and allowances, we should be able to see a reduction in there. So it's now the savings that they're going to make that they probably would use to now begin to deliver the programs in which they promised on.
So, okay, sorry.
No, that's the way they're going to do it. They're probably going to make some savings on that recurrent expenditure side and reprioritize the expenditure into that area. But there's still challenges on the funding side because of the drop in oil revenues. Their expectations on taxation, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, I'm sure it's going to go up more aggressively now. They're going to send those guys out on the streets to make sure they're collecting every single tax. So they're not going to be any freeloaders. If you've been evading taxes, I think you need to dust your bags and get out of town because there's going to be a zero tolerance because the situation is that desperate that we need to generate more non-oil revenues. And the Federal Inland Revenue Service is going to be set a very, very steep target. And they're going to drive that target to ensure revenues are coming in. Oil prices, we don't have that control of that, as you know. So I think that sounds the logical way that they're going to probably do it, at least between now and the end of the year, when they now have a chance to now, from scratch, build their own budget.
In terms of generating revenue now from taxes, we know that the Federal Inland Revenue Service has done a lot in the last couple of months, but as you said, there's still more work coming in front of them. Do you expect that there's going to be an increase in taxes, especially in value-added tax, which the IMF have said at 5% is quite low?
Yes, I mean, clearly, I think they will look at that options, but whether that is possible politically is another issue. There are trade-offs. Then, if you remove the subsidy, then you save $7 billion, clearly. So that's the best win situation for you. You run away from the subsidy, and all of a sudden, you have $7 billion in your pocket. There's no two ways about that. That's the low-hanging fruit right there. You increase VAT from 5% to 10% in a situation where Nigerians are crying and the purchasing power and the sort of people are complaining about not getting much, and you start taxing people after an election. Is that politically viable or possible with all your election campaigns? That's another political decision you have to think about in terms of increasing that. This budget actually makes a provision for increasing taxes on the wealthy. They're going to put more taxes on business class tickets, private jets, yachts, and all those sorts of things. So they're looking to increase the luxury taxes and increase the cost of flying business class and first class. So they're trying to tax the rich more. So we'll see what happens in terms of the tax profile. But clearly, subsidies and the increasing taxes would be your easiest way of making all the money back.
On the issue of subsidy, I remember when they tried to remove subsidy a couple of years ago, the issues that came up, the challenges that we had, the protest, the biggest protest I think that we've had in a very long time in Nigeria actually happened. Do you think that might also happen again when, for a certainty, it's actually removed from the budget?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I don't really have any inclination on how that will work out, but the numbers clearly state that if you do that, that's where you get your savings from. And I think, from my own personal perspective, I think that there's no reason why we should be subsidizing a product at $7 billion a year when that money can be moved into education and healthcare for Nigerians.
But this will also generate controversy as well for the oil marketers.
There's no controversy when there's no subsidy. So everybody pays the market price. So what we need to focus on in Nigeria really is to take a look at addressing the infrastructure deficit. We need to start to, and I guess when we talk about solutions, we'll come to that. Singapore is an island nation of less than maybe 5 million people. Singapore has more refining capacity for crude oil than we do, and we're probably the 5th largest oil producing country in the world. So those are the sort of issues we need to look at. So we need to go build refineries instead of importing fuel. That's the solution.
So that's one solution.
Yes.
Now, other solutions for the myriad of problems that we've talked about this morning.
Well, the other way to look at this is to take a look at your concessioning program. If you're spending all this money, this morning also, I think there are now plans to privatize some of the development banks. Privatization is a key thing because your government doesn't have to spend money on these enterprises anymore in terms of paying salaries. But one of the most successful ways, I think, is the concessioning. We do have an infrastructure commission, concessioning commission in place. And if the government could get the DMO, the infrastructure commission, and of course the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the NSIA, to work properly, we could get some savings. Right now, we've identified about 15 projects worth 8 trillion naira that have been classified as bankable, ready for concessioning. Unfortunately, the last government should have concessioned the airports, but they went and borrowed about 500 million from the Chinese government to try to upgrade it. Now, you didn't need to spend close to $500 to $1 billion to do that. If you had concessioned those airports, you could have gotten good people to come in, credible international people to spend their money on upgrading the airport, and you can give them 25-year concessions. So that way, government doesn't need to spend their money or borrow their money. So maybe you could now borrow 100 million to renovate some of the local airports, like in Ibadan or Yola, some of the small airports that do not have much commercial activity.
Or some of the airports that aren't even functioning at all.
Yes.
They're there, but they're just a carcass.
Exactly. So you could now probably spend a bit of money just to upgrade those ones, and the revenues you're making from the concessioning. So government doesn't need to spend money to do everything. And I think if they're smart about it, then they get their regulatory commission up and running. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, I think, is also a very critical part of things. And like we've said earlier, time and time again, our reserves fluctuate. There was a time where we had fiscal reserves on the excess crude, close to about 18, 19 billion. Right now, excess crude accounts and our fiscal reserves are down to $2 billion in a time of crisis. It doesn't work. So we need to build up the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the governors really have to stop the attitude of sharing all this money and actually making that investment. The stabilization fund of the Sovereign Wealth Fund only has $200 million. That cannot do anything for us. We need at least $10 billion to stabilize.
Mr. Adebajo, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you very much, Harriet, and have a nice weekend.
Have a nice weekend too. Now, students return to school on Monday this week after the March and April general elections. On the show today, we'll look at the cost of going back to school. Dr. Dolapo Bankole, Executive Director of Princeton Schools, joins me after this break.